mày thấy mà lại cắn à? Dạ. Ê, ăn cơ, mày mùi ăn
giống
ăn cơ.
như mày
Lên
à,
trên
dâu
này.
phá lù suy à. Để các cô này thấy ha, giống như mày ăn đồ dâu phá lù suy.
Khoa lấy. Lấy.
Con thịt mũ.
Khoa. Mấy à?
Mày này thấy à, giống như mày à, dâu phá lù suy à. Để các cô này thấy ha, giống như mày ăn đồ dâu phá lù suy.
Mà lại thấy mà lại cắn à mày.
Con.
Hai bia.
Giống mày không?
Siapa nama kamu? Di mana awak tinggal?
This painting is titled Here They Come. It's painted in 1965 by the Singaporean artist Koh Sia Yong. It shows a scene of itinerant hawkers who are selling their goods on the street. They look like they're about to flee the scene from presumably the authorities. But the authorities are not pictured here, and it adds to a sense of trepidation and anxiety as to what is about to happen to them.
看到这些东西不足为奇的嘛，跟我们这个生活有很大的关系了，就在印象里面很深刻，所以表现出来的里面就有小贩在卖这个菊桂的啦，卖那些菜的也有啊，还有老太婆卖一些辣椒啊什么这些东西。新加坡人主要是比较民众的一些生活啦。 新加坡人的一些比较低层的生活。那个场景呢是在潮州街，你知道吗？就是现在的这个卡基那边，那边有个很大的巴萨，都是潮州人在买卖东西的这店。在外面卖东西的小贩呢，有看到那个叫做地牛，就是说稽查员他们会来抓的，所以看到那边他就跑。 如果你不跑的话，可能你的货品、物件都会被充公这样。这种我们看惯了，有看到有一次就比较悲惨了，就是说那些跑的人，除了一些老太婆啦、卖香烟的老太婆或者卖菜的那些比较上年纪的妇女，他们跑了太过紧张就跌倒，整个东西都倒在地上，整个人也倒下来，所以。 看了，我们也是很同情这样，这个景象就有了。
Jangan lari! Jangan lari! Berhenti di situ! Berhenti! Tunggu di situ! Jangan lari! Berhenti! Berhenti!
你不看这？
Macam mana kita buat, bos? Kalau kita tak musnahkan hari ini, esok dia akan datang balik.
Kalau kau kasih pecahkan keretanya, dia akan datang balik besok.
Saya tengok macam mana dia datang balik esok tanpa kereta dia.
My father is a hawker, okay, since the early 50s when he came to Singapore from China. So actually, he's peddling street food. Started off with fishball noodles.
The hawker in my family was my grandmother. I lived with her since I was young. So every morning, about 5 o'clock, I'll wake up together with her, prepare the ingredients, and then we will bring it down to the cart.
我的父母一路来是在做小贩的，就在这边那边布吉蒂玛这边龙沟的上面，我们铺个木板，一排整排都是小贩摊位来的啦，哦。
我母亲拿着一个单挑放在肩膀这样挑，前面是放辣椒、酱青那些叶子，后面那个是放猪肠粉，放个小炉 steam 住那个猪肠粉，给它温这样挑去卖。不给河水火烧了，然后他来到嘎莱波也是这样卖。不过那时候一段时间是我父亲认为母亲这样挑是太辛苦了，他就做一辆木的推车，3个轮的，前面1个轮，后面2个轮的推车给我母亲推出去卖，直接推去政府主屋里面卖。
Normally, all the hawkers we will gather at one point to peddle our product, and that will create a market lah.
It's exactly like what you see in the market today: vegetables, fruits, foodstuff, all the different kind of foodstuff, and they also have tables and chairs, small tables and chairs around there.
Actually, all these stores during the stage of street hawkers are not licensed. They are all illegal.
Yes, they are all illegal. So when those inspectors come to chase, everybody runs, and that place will be left empty.
那个底屋车一来的时候，它是2边还跟1辆小萝莉啦。
And then suddenly somebody will shout in Hokkien, you know, 地姑啊，
回来了！这样我们听到了就一个传一个，就很快传了。
我们就跑去跟别他拿地姑来了，地姑来了，快点收！没救。
Everything goes crazy. Everybody will just pack their food stuff, and then they will start dispersing.
有的就飞那边，有的就跑那边，这是很乱就对了。
You don't know where they're going to, but all I can say is that they just run, you know, with all the things they have. And then my grandmother will then push the cart. By then, the 2 pails are on the floor. So as she pushed, I will carry the 2 pails and run with her. Where she's going, I don't know, but all I did was follow her. There were times that she will go a different way. I do not know where she would have gone to. And there were times that she got caught by the inspectors. Then they will break down the cart that she have created. And then I'll go and hide because I'll be too scared to stand out to see what's happening.
他来就是先冲到榴莲那边去了啦。他们最喜欢就是收榴莲啦，最喜欢收榴莲啦。那是榴莲一定是没有来生的啦。这个我讲的是实话，我没有讲错啦。榴莲每个都喜欢吃嘛，对啊。
我们不可能跟地姑做朋友啦，因为2个不一样的性质嘛。如果我们跟地姑做朋友，其他的小贩以为我们是给了什么好处给地姑嘛。地姑不是警察，地姑是属于卫生部的。这个警察我们不称呼警察，那时候叫马达。印象中我记得我们是做到2次，1次罚款是5块钱。
有时候底屋他们都会争吵啦，要给他罚款，有些他不要啦，有些不要啦。我们求情，有些那心软的都不要了，那么就不要了咯。那么在外面拿一点东西去就算了啦，拿一点东西就说他们有做工，拿一点东西啦。通常他们不会很强硬要罚款你的啦，通常会警告你啦。
My grandmother, she doesn't get fined, but of course the inspectors will tell her that you are so old, why don't you stop selling? And they will encourage her to stay home, you know. But she will not give up. She will go home, find another crate, and then she will start dragging it home, and then she start from square one. I couldn't understand why she did it, but I just admire her resilience. She just didn't give up at all.
I think that those people at that time are all survivors. They are very resilient. If you don't come back and peddle again, you got no other job. You can't earn a living at all.
40年代、50年代、60年代还没有独立之前的环境呢，是大部分呢，我们的父母亲都是从国南来的。 父亲30年代就来了。那我听他跟我们讲这些故事的时候，他们当年来的时候啊，其实1分钱都没有，他们空空穿到一条短裤，也简单的背心而已。那么就拿着在中国拿了一包米啊，这一包米呢，就是从中国搭这个盘船过来，大概1个月时间了。就是那包米呢，就是在船上自己煮来吃，吃米而已，没有东西吃了，米跟水而已。偶尔有些好一点，就带一点那种咸菜啦、蕹菜啊之类的东西，这样就横渡1个月，这样来到南洋。来了以后，他们还被关在这个那个时候英国统治嘛，抓去旗站上，去那边喷那种臭土的水啊，就是这种东西在那边喷，在那边挨了1个礼拜后呢，这等于是消毒，才可以过来新加坡了。
At that times in Singapore also there's not much work that offer other than coolie, which are those laborers at Dot and the Boat Quay area.
来了以后，又被分配到那种牛车水带的店屋上面去住，没有工钱的了，就是说有的吃而已。所以不是让人家讲说你吃饱了没有？以前的人是吃是主要，工钱不重要。所以老实讲是真的是很辛苦。
My father came from China, Tioan, which is also another major province next to what they commonly know now as Swatao. He came here to start a new living, and he went on to be a hawker. His hometown folks came to Singapore and find it difficult to find a job over here other than being a laborer at the harbour or the quay. My father, actually, he's more of an entrepreneur at that time. He already had 11 fishball noodle store, which he employed all his hometown folks, managing the store to sell fishball noodles.
The difference between then and now, right, is now you're going begging for people to become hawkers. In those days, hawkers was the only means of survival for a significant portion of the population, especially the older population, because there's no means of otherwise making a living. Right?
Here They Come shows another side to the story of modernization in Singapore. It shows it from a perspective of workers who were vulnerable in Singapore. Koh, like many of his peers, believed that art was a vehicle for social change. So as a result of that, Koh often was interested in depicting the working class or the plight and conditions that they faced, hoping that this would shed light on their everyday conditions. This was a kind of critique also of the kind of economic and social structures that perpetuated such conditions.
你过来出面，想要来看阮人无饭食，要死啊，是无？死囡仔咧，若再细细汉来，甲你夹落管子啊，去水甲你淹死，淹袂死啊，甲你拖去迄马车站，马甲你弄死，弄袂死咧，甲你拖去迄7层楼的酒店，伫楼顶甲你夹落来，死囡仔。
新加坡广播电台现在播送《双星之夜》。
我老爸骂你骂甲臭头啊！
无咧，伊今日真客气咧。头早骂我的时阵，互我死3摆呢，平时我都要死5、6摆。
你知影骂你，你过来。
看到这个脸好好，会使用，就行来互你咯。
免可怜我。
我哪有可怜你？我是惊你无做工，啊，今年就来找你咯。
我做工真闲。你唔是爱伫出来屋内地牛的衫，有甲直直水水咩？
我好命吗？厝内有老母替我喂。聪明，
恁爱收，你家己收，我家己袂信的。顶摆我输我，你是因为我练是旧的，后摆我有4年练了，我包赢的。
你莫好练，莫袂记吼。你长岁到大就毋捌赢过我。
你嘛是我袂记啊，长岁到大，你嘛毋捌赢过我。其实我们无应该做朋友。
对啊，古早读册的时阵，我若是因为小上班，无变甲做朋友的啦。
对啊，你看我人，做的物件无相，讲话也无相，生活也无相，过来的人一看嘛会知，我人根本毋是朋友。
真奇怪吼，我若逐摆拄到的时就直直相骂，啊，今日咧，嘛接两个人笑笑抢的直相干。
你点啦？一万领我能走好了，你无欠我，我无欠你。你做你的地牛，我买我的水果。后摆佫拄着，你免避免我，你莫扮chan我。
定吊背，啊，较等你慢慢扮chan我。
你包输，准备好了未
？7号就准备好了。
1、2、3。
60年代的新加坡人，我的感觉班上都没有什么要求了，大家都会多少一点帮助，因为都是同一个港崩或者同一个街道的人，是很好的一种环境啊，协助、协同的一种感情。大家都已经习惯于这种刻苦勤劳的一种生活。只是说如何在这个求生的环境里面呢，去改变自己的命运。
So this was a time when the state, and the state meaning the government, wanted to ensure that society became more organized and more regulated. But this was a transition, if you want. People had to make a living, and people made a living in the informal sectors. They sold goods on the street, they sold things, drinks, food. Many of them were itinerant hawkers, right? If you look at the population, say in 1965, it was a population then of about 1.8 million, just shy of 2 million, predominantly Chinese. But it was a young population. The bulk of the population were below 30 years old, I believe. So it was a young population, but the educational level was not very high.
At that time, the legacy of the lack of education continues because of the neglect of the colonial government, and the English schools were just starting to be built. Right? I'll give you a personal example. I lived in Bukit Ho Swee. There were two Chinese primary schools there, right? All the kids I played with, probably only 3 of us actually went to secondary school. So unemployment rate was quite high, and birth rate was very high. And so the informal economy was a very important part of the economy. For a lot of people, that's the only means of making a living. So you get this proliferation of hawkers. when we now call street food, right? The street food is now in hawker center, so they're no longer in the street. But at that time, street food really was in the street. Every hawker actually had a route, daily routine. They will go to different places. So if you, in those days, you kind of know which part of the day when the hawker will come.
During that times, okay, the hawker stores actually move from place to place. We don't station only at one place. Illegal hawker usually you have to move to where the crowd is.
What happened was that if I sat outside my house at Lavender Street, I would get a whole series of hawkers pushing their carts. 3 o'clock, this guy would come. 4 o'clock, the Pia man would come. 5 o'clock, Chai Tao Kui man would come. And it was wonderful. You just sat there and waited for these hawkers to come and you know, right to your doorstep, sort of. Don't ask me about cleanliness and all that, you know. I mean, we all survive anyway, you know. But it was wonderful because you see, the thing that's most dear to Singaporeans is food. And as far as that was concerned, we had it as good as you have it today. Only we had it in a different way, actually. Now, the sounds were interesting because you had the hawkers going around, and of course, the way that they advertised their wares were, they would call out, you know, whatever they were selling. And of course, there was one particular kind of food, Hokkien mee, where the hawker typically had these 2 pieces of bamboo, where you would tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. You knew that the Hokkien mee seller was coming. I remember one hawker that sold what we commonly call kana, you know, olive seeds and all that. He would come late at night. His method of advertising, he played an erhu, you know, as he came along.
So obviously, there's some stationary ones, like in Chinatown especially, right? So they were kind of part of the street scene all the time. So in that painting, you're seeing that the newly independent government was beginning to try to rationalize the informal economy and the beginning of sort of herding all the hawkers into hawker centers.
From the picture itself, I can see that there's a rattan of fish that the hawker are peddling. During that times, Teochew like to peddle fish which are already cooked. And that fish itself in Teochew, we call it he pung. He pung, that means fish and rice. And a lot of people mistaken that we eat the fish with rice. But actually no, the actual meaning is Teochew eat the fish as rice. This fish actually came from Keelong. The whole process of cooking the fish is very simple. They don't degauge the fish, they don't clean the fish, even de-skill, nothing of all this happened. Okay, original the fish, they will just line it up on the rattan basket and submerge the whole thing into the boiling seawater. This is where, okay, it retained the original, the so-called the ocean taste in the fish. To some people, they love it, but to me, I hate it a lot.
50年代跟60年代的街头小贩的东西失去了很多了，比如是蛙粿啦。
The 蛙粿 is 4 to 5 times bigger than the 焗粿. Actually, 焗粿 is a Teochew food. Teochew food which go with those, preserved radish, chai po they call it. Okay. Whereas for 蛙粿 is actually a Hokkien version of another, okay, all these cupcake, you call it cupcake.
那个蛙粿是好像一个我们吃饭的碗这样，不过它是阿弥莲做的那个碗，然后那个粉放下去，好像做焗粿这样的粉放下去，它去 steam 好了，它上面是淋那个菜脯跟虾米跟蒜头拿去炒香香，这样 放在 on top 它的上面，然后你要辣椒就淋辣椒，不要辣椒就不要淋辣椒，那个是很好吃。
During the times okay where lives are hard, portions that are big are welcomed by people. But slowly, when you find that people life getting better, all this, wak kueh just to fill up the appetite is not something that people look forward to have a nice meal.
早期我们在读这个拿法的时候呢，就是学校也是很注重写诗的东西，就是说学校也鼓励啊，做表现生活呢，就是艺术家的一个手段这样。那么艺术家呢，最重要的是要关注民众的生活，体验民众这样，表现民众的喜爱的东西。作为一个艺术家，可能就是说你要熟悉你周边的环境，你才有办法去描写嘛。那么更深一步讲，人家说艺术工作者是人类灵魂的工程师。当然，我们还要进一步写出一些能够引导人们走向美好的作品。
Another painting by Koh Sia Yong is Cannot Grow Vegetables Anymore, which was executed in 1968. It shows a father and son on their farmland, and the father is telling their son that they can no longer grow agricultural products anymore. While many associate farming with occupation, with just a job or a way of living, when this sort of clearing of land happened, many people lost their way of life or kinship ties and the communities in which were based around their farms.
学绘画呢的名字不能再种菜，是我自己取的，因为这个也是有个原因的。当年我是住在大巴窑那一带的嘛，那个时候的大巴窑还不是说很开放，建一个主屋，还是很多那些种菜的广东人。我们以前小的时候也在那一带，去那边抓鱼啊，那边的沟渠有蚯蚓啊，去那边抓蚯蚓、养鱼啊。后来呢，就是一直在发展这个主屋的时候呢，就有看到有一家人也是有这样的情境，就是说他们的孩子在跟他的父亲问说。这个事情这样，他父亲说不能够再种下去了，因为我们要被赶了。所以就记起我把这个事件作为一个创作的题材这样啊，所以就画了这幅画这样。
Throughout the 50s, there were actually a lot of cash vegetable farms. Hogang in the early 60s would have been rural. Loyang was just basically farmland. On the west coast side, Lim Chu Kang is still sort of farmland. The urban areas actually is quite limited in some ways.
波东巴西在60年代、70年代是一个农村来的，那个地方全部都是种田啦，还有水池啦，那个边缘还有那个养牛啦，什么这些都有。
波东巴西的环境呢，就是它有一条河，那么两边有一些印度人在那边养牛，牛在那边冲凉，我们跟很多同学常常去那边写生。
这个照片就是当时的菜园了，波东巴西的菜园。那么这一张呢，我们也看到，就是说菜园的背后已经有建筑起来了。那么告诉我们，就是说这个菜园慢慢要退位了，要改变成为住宅区了。
During that times, okay, the government not only pay by the plot ratio, It go by the usage of the piece of land. That means what sort of tree you're planting, vegetable, all this. To what I know, the fruit trees like coconut trees, banana trees, mango trees, this sort of tree, they are paying a higher value to the landowner. Usually when the government start to tell all these villagers that they will be taking back the land in 2 to 3 years' time, you'll find a lot of villagers start planting a lot of fruit trees all around their estate.
当时波隆巴应该算是很趣味的一个乡村，在当时来讲啊，那么现在我们看到的都是好心不了，所以已经没有什么感觉了。
当然我们会感受到说，哦，新加坡是已经不一样了，不只是波东巴西，到处都感觉到。 天天都在改变中。这个就是在马里本来的地方拍的，这2个马来少年人在卖拉西勒玛，我要让人家知道，这个马里本来已经开始建立起来了。 以后我们看到的都是新的屋子了，那么这个孩子呢，是被这个景，就是说将来他的生活是不一样的，啊，是一定是不一样的。进步里面当然我们会失去一些东西，失去什么呢？就是失去以前那种很朴素的、很简单的那人和人之间的关系。 很好，现在变成疏远了一些。那么这个就要看我们怎么再连接起来，这个是我们必须要去考虑的、去想的。
无电咱哪拄？一礼拜了咧，你还阁无去摆摊咧？咱真紧呀，连买电油的钱本无了，莫讲食饭啊！ 暗时暗暝么，连饭本看无啊！
洗脸较贵了，我个找较偏的。
一礼拜了咧，你找着未？了规个脸行倒去。
规个脸互地府冲歹了咯。
迄日我毋是看阿明举来互你吗？
叫伊收倒转啊！
你加油你啊！你想你真有钱啊？去甲举转来。
阿明后交啊，毋是朋友了。
什么毋是朋友啊？恁2个啊，自细汉佚佗较大，就是破边落大雨，恁2个本做阵去学堂啊。什么毋是朋友？你想要骗人啊？去甲举转来。
The pushcart is made by my grandmother. It is a rectangular wooden crate, all right? 4 wheels below it. On top, she would saw a big hole in the center, and then over at this side, she would saw off the center portion so that she can place the kerosene stove here. On top, there will be a pot for her to steam the chi chong fan. Then over here, she will have a little rectangular box where all her chi chong fan is inside. And then over here will be a pot where her fried bee hoon was. Over here, 2 handles. This is where she will push. And she has a little ledge to put 2 pails of water for her to wash her hands and the plates and cutlery. So this is the cart that she used to push every morning to and fro the marketplace.
The industrialization process was absolutely necessary for economic development, all right? But at the same time, you still have the tail end of the colonial economy that is basically commodity-oriented, but domestically wasn't developing at all, right? So for a period of time, you have this overlap of two trajectories. One is a continuation of the past, and one is development of the future. Right?
The disappearance of the vegetable farms was necessary because you wouldn't have been able to industrialize, and certainly you would not have today's HDB flats, which are really the backbone of the high standard of living that we have as compared to many other countries.
So the early industries were not your major industries that you associate industrialization with. Singapore went into what we call light industries first, so you are able to produce things in small places like a shop house or a makeshift wooden and zinc roof kind of setup. In 1965, we started building what we call these multi-story flatted factories. Now, these were bases where you can produce small, not so sophisticated, technologically advanced items like garments, shoes, mosquito coils, cosmetics, hair oils, those kinds of industries. Singapore was at one time also producing fish hooks. So these were the kinds of light industries that started off in the 1960s. And of course, Singapore did not have a lot of capital, so you did not have major investors. And then gradually they started inviting Japanese investors, American investors, and then you ramp up the type of industries you had to the more sophisticated type. You made cameras, for instance, or calculators, or technical instruments. But before that, it was pretty basic. And that was because you just needed to create the opportunities to produce things and get people into the factories to produce those things.
从1967年到1971年之间，扫荡的做我们非法的小贩，它的密度越来越密了，等我们就是不是办法嘛。
When they caught all these hawkers, they may get fined or whatever, but at the same time they are actually doing registration for the hawkers. During that time, the agency is trying to get the hawker organized and put into hawker center.
注册了进去那个巴萨，就用抽签的方式。 你们要就注册，你们不要他也不逼你们嘛。不过你不可以在外面再摆摊了，那是非法的咯。看你选择要进去巴萨固定的，还是你要再做非法的小贩。
1975年7月办的这个布基迪马小贩中心，然后就抽签，抽签了看谁的位置在哪里啦。哦，求神咯，去倒背公那边拜神咯，拜求的抽到好签哦。 抽到好签咯，抽到我的位置还抽到不错啦。
My grandmother actually wanted to get a license, so she asked them if she can apply for it, but they discouraged her. There was once I went with her to the what they call the HDB council house, and she tried to apply. So they rejected. They told her, no, you're too old. It's better that you stay home. Even though she tried to give her reasons to say her children are not with her and she's living alone only with me as her granddaughter. So they just told her, say, no, it's better that you stay home. You're too old to hold a license and things like that, yeah. After that, she didn't go back again. She continued to be a hawker, still an illegal hawker until I finished school and I started working. So after that, she stopped being a hawker. By then, she was about 70, late 70.
小贩中心刚刚起是蛮热闹的，因为这边的小贩都没有了。1970多年到1980多年的小贩是最好做的，现在是摇头。
Here they come and cannot grow vegetables anymore are significant because they show us the kind of urban transformation that was taking place in Singapore in the 1960s. The paintings get us to question the kind of relentless and remorseless transformation that we still see in Singapore today. And beyond a local level, it also gets us to think about the kind of ecological crisis and environmental changes that we are making on a global scale. It gets us to think about whether or not what we're doing is still sustainable in terms of industrial civilization.
岁月不留人，一眨眼间呢，就几十年就这样过去了。好像我有时候把东西收，有时候翻出来看，哇，怎么30年了？真的是想不到啊！好像这里有一幅画是以前叫无人画的，我相信很多朋友们都看不出这个是什么地方的。 这个就是现在的无人地铁站里面，大概要大到那边去啊。当时都是野林跟森林的地方，所以我们当时去那边换的在马来人住那边，他们这些住那边也是多数是抓鱼的啦、捕鱼啦，或者做一些比较简单的养鸡、养鸭这些东西。这个是当年的无人，所以变成是。 只是成为一个历史的纪念。
There was a time where you could see that things were more exciting in Singapore, right? Today you look at Singapore, everything seems so ordered, regulated, everything is sort of planned. So there was a degree of messiness at the time. If you look at the painting, there was a different Singapore. I think there was a very different time where people were prepared to take initiatives, do things, and then also be prepared to take responsibilities for what they did as an individual, as a group. But now I think things are very different. People want to ask permission first before doing things. And sometimes, they feel that they should not proceed because the government will not allow or they'll be punished, and then the fear of punishment. So I think we've lost something of the initiative, of the individual effort, the individual drive to do things. Good and bad, I think chaos is never good, but at the same time, some degree of creativity, or creative chaos, as some people call it, it is good to get society to change and move and evolve. But it's always a balance and a tension between regulation and allowing some space for messiness.
煮粿啊，煮粿啊，来这位煮粿啊！囡仔食了够大汉啊，老人食了大人赞啊！来煮粿，煮粿，来买煮粿。煮粿嘛，煮粿。来，会使，2粒，哇！
Celaka. Peniaga Cikgu tu datang balik.
Macam mana dia dapat duit dengan cepat untuk beli kereta tu?
Dulu aku dah hancurkan kereta dia, tak guna. Kali ni kita mesti patang kaki dia.
Bos, jom kita pergi.
Nanti dulu.
成個星期都冇見你，我以為你冇做咗添。
是咯，我是條尾標啊，我去食紅醋啊，一個人徛你大間，真賤。嗰是買煮粿較好啦，嗬！來，個針來，感謝啊！來，感謝，來，煮粿啊，煮粿來叫我。
Bos, tunggu apa lagi?
Tunggu.
貴姓公胖胖，面長來煮粿。
Awak, jangan lari!
mati kau.
Aku tak boleh dah. Aku tak boleh. Ah. Eh, tengok pangcik lah.
你把你大炮啊！
我无变啊，我死年咧死袂紧啊，地鼓嘛对袂着啊。
啊，你练到落桥来诶？
这好朋友好爱诶，
好朋友，你是讲叫什么名？
你掠着我，我就甲你讲哦。Bos, kita tangkap dia, patahkan kaki dia.
Kita kena paksa dia bagi tahu nama kawan dia juga. Lepas tu kita patahkan kaki kawan dia juga.
你给我等什么？
准备好了未？
我7岁就准备好了。1、2、3。
新加坡现在都是现代化的，不容易，要来创作不容易。好像现在的现代 building， 你去描写，没有像以前新加坡和旧新加坡这么好看。旧新加坡河面上也有那个大的那个东港啊什么啊，所以还有一些船夫什么来来去去，所以看起来很有生命力。现在的新加坡河虽然这里也是东港船，但是它是载游客在玩的，相差是很厉害，变成是游玩的地方，不是生活地方，所以画也比较难。以前的因为有一点好像这样的气味啊，所以看起来也不大一样。一般上我们表现东西有旧的传统会比较容易引起人家的共鸣。新的东西太难表现了，所以很多人不是现在开始画抽象画的这样，就是不要看了，就是涂啊，这样就是像不一样的环境的，所以变成我们的感情的变重，慢慢找到别的地方去。
Oh yeah.